On most of our calendars, today is Mother's Day. And on some of our calendars, that day is circled in red with big exclamation points beside it so we won't forget. Mine, for example. But on the Christian calendar, today is the 6th Sunday of Easter, which sometimes catches even me by surprise. Isn't Easter over? Didn't we do all that like 5 weeks ago? Well, yes, we did. We celebrated the resurrection of Jesus, and we did it in a big way. But in the early church, that celebration went on for weeks. And through the centuries, Christians have determined that what it really takes to celebrate the resurrection is about 50 days, what some people call the Great 50 Days between Easter and Pentecost, of which we are only on about day number 36. So I've been wondering how I can bring these things together. The church's ongoing celebration of the resurrection of Jesus and Mother's Day. And as I thought about it, this passage of Scripture from Luke 24 came to mind. Luke 24, 1 through 11. A story that celebrates the resurrection, certainly. It mentions at least one mother by name. But more than that, it honors the role of women in general, and particularly the part they play in the proclamation of the good news. This passage comes just after Joseph of Arimathea has wrapped the body of Jesus in a linen cloth and laid it in a tomb carved out of rock, a new tomb where no one had ever been laid. It was laid in the day of preparation for the Passover. The Sabbath was just beginning. Luke tells us that the women who had come with Jesus from Galilee followed, and they saw the tomb and how his body was laid. Then they returned and prepared spices and ointments, and because they were good and God-fearing women, on the Sabbath day they rested according to the commandment. Hear the word of the Lord from Luke 24, 1 through 11. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they came to the tomb, taking the spices that they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly 2 men in dazzling clothes stood beside them. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground, but the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and be crucified, and on the 3rd day rise again." Then they remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. So there. You know how it is. Slumped in a plastic chair at the laundromat, watching your clothes go around and around in one of those big dryers. Nothing to read but a tattered copy of the National Enquirer or a Ladies' Home Journal from December 1997. It's hot. Your hair sticks to your scalp. You fan yourself with an old newspaper while one of your children, bare-chested, goes racing around the washing machines, applying a Snickers bar to his face like war paint. Under those circumstances, you would be glad for almost any diversion. And so when a neighbor walks in with a full laundry basket and a box of Tide, you get up out of your seat. "Hey," you say, "how you doing?" You begin to talk about the weather, about how hot it's been, and then one complaint leads to another. You talk about children, your children, and what a handful they've been. And finally about your no-count husband who promised to paint the porch last September, and here it is, May. And even though he's been laid off from his job since February, he hasn't lifted a finger around the house. Eventually, though, the talk gets interesting. As your neighbor mentions that dark blue Chrysler that was parked in front of Liz Burnett's house last night, all night, while her husband is delivering a load of new car parts to Wisconsin. And your voices drop to a whisper as the two of you try to figure out just what's going on there. Okay, so maybe you don't know how it is. Maybe you've never been in a laundromat before. But you can probably imagine, can't you, what goes on in a place like that? Idle chit-chat. Plenty of it. The stuff you talk about when all you've got is time to kill. The boredom demands some relief, and so you begin to make conversation out of anything, out of whatever comes to mind. But what makes sense in the laundromat under those circumstances doesn't always make sense when you get back home. Sometime during dinner, you look up at your husband and say, "Oh, by the way, I was talking with our neighbor about that dark blue Chrysler parked in front of Liz Burnett's house last night. We think something is going on there." And that's when he gives you that look. You know the look I'm talking about? The look that says, this woman has sniffed a little too much fabric softener. That look. Here they come, running down the road from the cemetery, their arms pumping, their skirts flying, bursting into the room where the disciples are just beginning to think about breakfast. Guess what, they say. Guess what? And the disciples, still rubbing the sleep out of their eyes, say, "What? What is it?" "He's not there," the women say. Who? Jesus. He's not there. We went to the tomb this morning early. We went up there to anoint his body for a proper burial. And we were standing there. Suddenly there were these two men dressed in dazzling clothes. And they, wait a minute, you forgot to tell him about the stone. Oh yes, the stone. We were wondering who would roll the stone away, but when we got there, it was already rolled away so that you could look inside the tomb, and that's what we did. We looked in there, and we saw the place where Jesus had been laid, but he wasn't there anymore. He had been there on Friday night, but not on Sunday morning. He wasn't there. We don't know where he was. But while we were standing there, these men came, and they started talking to us, and they said, "Why do you look for the living among the dead?" And I thought, well, I'm not looking for the living. I'm looking for the dead. I'm looking for Jesus, who was crucified on Friday, who was laid in this tomb. That's who I'm looking for. What are you talking about? He said, "He's not here. Jesus, who was dead, has been raised from the dead. Don't you remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that he was on his way to Jerusalem where he would be killed and buried, but on the third day rise?" And then we looked at each other, we did remember. That's what he said. He said he would rise again, and here it is, the third day, and here we are. And that's when the disciples gave the women that look. You know the one I'm talking about. The one that says somebody has been sniffing too many burial spices. You women are imagining things. I mean, it would be wonderful if it were true. It would be the most incredible thing that had ever happened. But it couldn't be true. Could it?